Good morning, everyone. So I was prepping this morning and I wasn't able to make it to the yoga sanctuary. So I wondered if you would just join me in one breath to arrive. Let's just take a breath in through our nose. You can do it to a count of 3 or 4. And then you can blow it out through your mouth or through your nose. So it's been a long few days and we are all digesting a lot. So the breath will help us digest. So let's breathe in and out. Thank you. I mean, I could do that for the whole 30 minutes, but I won't. So I have so many thank yous, but I'm afraid that in a fairy tale at my child's christening, I'll forget to mention a fairy godmother and then be cursed, but I will try. I want to thank everyone at the Key West Literary Seminar, the organizers, Arlo and his family. I want to thank the people at Books and Books, Judy, George, Emily, Anna. There's so many people I love there. I want to thank Michael Blades and Kathy Kilroy, who hosted me here last time and I know are so important to the festival. So I'll start there. And my talk, as you probably saw, is called Family Secrets, Fragmented Narratives, and Funny Business. Basically, I just sent Arlo an email about interesting things, and then he was like, why don't you make a talk about all of them? So here's my attempt. And yes, permission to laugh and cry. My nickname at home is BMB, Big Mouth Bushra. My friends say I can't keep a secret, and I say to them, you have no idea how many secrets I'm keeping right now. Oh, they'll say, tell us one, and I only fall for that sometimes. I'm very selective in the revealing of my secrets, which is why I write fiction and not memoir. The kind of fiction I write is autobiographical fiction, which back in the day was just called fiction. Think of Baldwin and Betty Smith and even Melville, who rowed the whaleboats. I know Key West people that rowed is not the right word, but I like it better than sail, so I'm going to keep it. And I think what is funnier than the idea of fiction? And the first joke is always on the first page of the book where it says, this is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to persons living or dead or actual events is purely coincidental. So I am one of my family's biggest secrets, which is why I'm standing here with a microphone talking to all of you about them, because I am BMB. My books tell the story of my secret, which is that I ran away from home when I was quite young, and my family didn't know where I was for many years. They didn't tell anyone why I'd left, and I kept where I was a secret. My books tell the story of this secret, and I traveled throughout the country on the Greyhound bus, sometimes hitchhiking, thinking I was some kind of Jack Kerouac, but I learned quickly that it's one thing to be on the road when you are a young white man, and another when you are a young Pakistani woman. And I survived the time by imagining everything that was happening to me as a story I would write down in little fragments on napkins and in dime store notebooks and in postcards and letters to friends. And believe it or not, Key West was one of my favorite places to visit during this time of, maybe you will believe it because you're all here. It was one of my safe havens during those runaway years. It was the 90s, and it was a place where I could find other youth like me. I'd take the Greyhound here from California or New York City and then crash on couches. No one questioned why I wasn't in school, or why I only had 2 pairs of clothing, or why it looked like I cut my own hair without ever even looking in a mirror. But the young people I met here had their own secrets. And all of us, we didn't want to remember our past, and we didn't know if we had a future. And in those moments, we were in pure presence. I don't think that's what the Buddha necessarily meant about presence and mindfulness, but it really felt very, very present. So one of the last times I was in Key West, a friend took me to a psychic, of course, and she said, this psychic is a real seer, and she lived in a trailer near Smathers Beach. I remember she had dark, messy hair in a bun, kind of like me, and she was wearing a robe, a robe, and slippers, and I was like, I don't know if this is a real seer, but she has seen some things, and she said to me, she said, your parents are praying for you. They're praying for you all the time. You're surrounded by their prayers. And that's the only thing that's been keeping you safe this entire time. You need to go back home. Everyone is waiting for you. I know, it gave me She probably could have said that to anyone, but it really did give me the chills, and I did end up going back home to New York City. And I thought that once I got back to Queens, I could, just like Jack Kerouac, who, I don't know if you know this, wrote his first drafts of On the Road and many of his books in Queens, in Rego Park, that I could just, in libraries and at his mom's house, that I could just like sit down at a typewriter and let it just pour all out of me. But I couldn't, maybe because I wasn't on Benzedrine, but also because, again, it's very different being Jack Kerouac and different being me. Because let's be real, there's a lot of assumptions about Muslims, there's a lot of assumptions about Muslim families, and anything I would write could be used against me or my community. I grew up in a community that was heavily surveilled, detained, deported, and any attention from the public was seen as dangerous. And I also realized that I couldn't just tell the story of being on the road without really sharing what home meant, because really, the character Razia, who is an alter ego, she carried her home with her wherever she went. I know everyone does that, but in this specific situation, it was a home that people might not understand or know. Her culture, her Pakistani culture, her Muslim religion, they formed her being, and she couldn't run away from them, just like she couldn't run away from her physical body. And I wrestled with all these feelings, and the work would come out completely disconnected, disjointed, non-chronological, messy. And because I was a poet, and I mentioned yesterday, I'm really trying to coin this term this week, a poet who writes prose, I ended up just writing a book that was like a poem, so one that circled around in time, didn't have any kind of finished endings, left large blank spaces, and it would just circle around and around the moment of her leaving, almost like it was like a black hole. And then at some point, that book became Corona, and an editor read that book and then asked if I would write another book in which I shared what was missing from the first book, all the empty spaces, all those fragments, which, if you think about it, like the fragments, everything you leave out of a story is almost like the dark matter. I have been watching Stranger Things, so it's like the dark antimatter that has like intense power. And so I thought, okay, maybe I'll try to write into those blank spaces. And again, it was so hard to do. But when I finally was able to do it, and I learned some tricks, which I'm gonna share with you today, when I was finally able to do it, I was so shocked to see that when I went into that black hole, of my memories, there was a tremendous amount of light. There was friendships, childhood friendships. There was like a love for my spirituality that I learned, even though if I practiced it differently, a spirituality that really affected me. There was community relations. There were my parents, so I found so much light in that black hole, and then that book became Roses. I realized as I was writing it, because now so much time had passed, that family secrets are historic secrets. Because, as Marlon said, it's really annoying when your actual life story is now a historical novel. But I found that, and to share a little bit more about this, I want to share a random anecdote, because this talk is also going to be fragmented. Last year, I went to a best friend's house, a Pakistani best friend in the community, and I think it was like Thanksgiving time, and my friend had gotten one of these like books which you would ask your parents questions to like bond with them. And I mean, it's a great idea, but we don't really talk like that. We don't spill our deep, dark histories with each other. Our parent-child relationships are not like that. And so this was the friend who, when in the 80s, all of us wanted to be in Living Color, and she wanted to be on the Brady Bunch. So we all were like rolling our eyes. We're like waiting for Auntie to yell at her. And when I say auntie, I mean it like Zoran Mamdani, an elder in my community, not someone who's my blood relative, but someone I respect. And so we were all waiting for Auntie to yell at her. And the first question was, tell me about a trip you took as a child. And Auntie started telling a story about being on one of the trains during partition, because I am Midnight's grandchild, if you know the Salman Rushdie book. So it was our parents who lived through partition of India, Pakistan, now Bangladesh. And she was on one of those trains. And I won't go into details because, again, I don't give away all the secrets, but none of us knew that Auntie was on one of those trains. And I've written a lot about this Auntie, and then I realized that always around this character, there was that history that was just hidden. That hidden secret was always there in who she was. Like always there was a bloody train in the background. I think one reason I am a BMB is because I do believe we need to tell our secrets, and we can tell them when we're ready and how we're ready and with who we're ready. That's one thing I tell my students. So I want to share, for the last 13 years, I've been teaching a class called Two Truths and a Lie, writing memoir and autobiographical fiction. This is not a commercial, I'm just giving you backstory. The class, and actually my editor here knows that when the book came out, like I've been teaching this class for 13 to almost actually 20 years. And everyone, all my students just came out of the woodwork and were like, oh, how can we help with this book? And it was, at some point the publicist was like, what is Two Truths and a Lie? Because there were so many people. But I'm gonna give you some of the lessons that we do, but I can't, of course, do the whole class today. But I'll tell you what I read to them on the very first day of class. So what I read to them are 7 of the tools and tricks that have helped me break through the fears around telling family secrets. So number 1, the drawback of writing autobiographical fiction is that the people in your head are not imaginary, they're real. And they're the people you love the most and are most afraid of hurting or losing. But you can use your imagination so much to imagine your mother hurling plates and your father being explosively silent or being left out of every family reunion. You could use your imagination for that so much that you never even get to the writing. And you actually have no idea what the writing will look like. You might start with a feeling that's very angry with a lot of pain, but as you write, you will be transformed and the story will be transformed and often the relationship will be transformed. And so you just need to, as Calm said, make the mark on the page. You just need to begin writing. 2, writing is not publishing. You never have to publish what you write. You are writing for yourself. You're writing to heal yourself, to unburden yourself of these secrets, to maybe create something for your children to read. You never have to publish. And it sometimes takes a lot of time to find a publisher. It took me 6 years to find a publisher for my first book and 10 to find a publisher for my second book. And I needed those years to grow, to heal, and to rebuild my relationships with my family before I ever published. 3, listen to Dorothy Allison. Allison, who I'm sure everyone knows, Dorothy Allison, the writer of The Unforgettable Bastard out of Carolina, she was asked at some point how she could create such amazing portraits of the people in her family. And she said you really had to try to make them dimensional. You had to do everything you could to add dimension to a character. It's only when you use characters in small ways, in caricatures, that you betray them. And creating that dimension takes time, and it might take doing those interview questions. It might take reading letters, going into diaries, but isn't that why you're writing autobiographical work in the first place? 4, what a coincidence that everyone in this class is totally innocent and good. I feel like you can't write any kind of autobiographical work without showing your own flaws, the mistakes you've made, the way that you've hurt people, and that's sometimes really, really hard to do, but we do a lot of generative exercises to make that happen. 5, I don't make you look bad, you make you look bad. Those are words from one of my friends, who's a great writer, Ed Lin. And he felt that if people had hurt you, either accidentally or purpose, at the end of the day, that act still existed. And when people got upset, they were more upset that a certain truth or a crime or a terrible memory had been brought into light, and that writing was kind of an explosion, but really that truth or secret had been stifling the relationship for years. So often, and I have found this in my life, when you bring that out, things change. Like there's almost like a freedom and a release of breath when you finally write the story. 6, forgiveness as an act of writing. There's another really amazing epistolary writer called E.J. Koh, and she was told by one of her mentors, she actually gave in a whole bunch of poems, and her mentor said to her, the poems you write about your mother are unforgiving. I'm not telling you to forgive your mother, I'm not telling you that you must do that, but the poem must forgive her, or the poem must forgive you for not forgiving her. So let me just take a moment with that, because it's a lot of words. But like, Any piece of writing, you must either forgive, if it's based on a true person, you must forgive them or forgive yourself for not forgiving them. And if you do that, this does something really amazing to the emotional writing blocks that are present. 7, be braver than you think. When I was young, I spent all my free time in the library, and the world I wanted to live in was the world of books. But I could never find a story like mine. And then I discovered that not only was it hard to find a publisher who would publish a book about a Muslim woman who's not oppressed, it was also difficult for many of us to overcome the family and community taboos. But I truly believe that those of us who are called to this craft, we know we must write because it's true. Our mother, father, brother, sister, or cat could end up hating us. But if you don't write, you'll end up hating yourself. And ultimately, we write not only for the world, but for our souls. So I thought that I just wanted to share a little bit of that, and then I thought I would do something that's a big risk for me, which is read from a fragment of a new novel, and it's something in which I am going into a lot of taboo subjects for me, and the character at this point is very flawed, and I want to dedicate this to all people who are part of the funny business of selling books, because it is a funny business. It's a beautiful business, and most of my life I've worked in bookstores, and so I love going to Books and Books. It's one of my favorite places to hang out in Key West. If you have, they're selling books here, but also drop by the store. So this next piece is dedicated to all booksellers, and specifically to Ben McFall, who was one of my mentors. He was an iconic bookseller at the Strand. He passed away 4 years ago, and he gave me permission to turn him into a character before he passed away, which is beautiful. And actually, when we do the class, we also do this whole permission flowchart of how you can get permission from someone to ask if you can write about them. So I really am so grateful that I got Ben's loving permission to write about him. All right, here we go. When I began to work at the Strand, Ben took me under his wing. Ben McFall was a legend even back then, the oracle of the Strand. Every day, a stream of his admirers came into the store to talk to him, have him recommend books, or if they were regulars, see what books he'd saved for them. They'd bring him gifts of chocolate, flowers. I'd always know who these people were when they first entered the store and made a beeline for the back where Ben's fiction desk was. Celebrities came every day to meet him, and around Ben, I'd see the hard shells of their protectiveness fall. They'd break open and become innocent bookworms, the children they'd once been. Ben would pull the books he'd been saving saving for them from under his desk, and their faces would break open like flowers. And I feel like the only other place I've seen this is at Books and Books with Judy Blume. I was working the early shift that day. It was a gloomy, bitter February, the kind that made even the most diehard New Yorkers make plans to leave. I guess many of you just come here. Freezing, howling, angry winds pounced through the long avenues of Manhattan, swept the garbage from the trees and streets and threw it in everyone's faces. I felt as if I'd never be warm again. Within seconds of getting off the train in Union Square, I stepped into a slushy puddle, and my sneakers, which were sponges, got immediately soaked. The bottoms of my jeans got wet and dirty. I wore sneakers even in the winter because all I did was move, myself and books. And in sneakers, I could run more easily, climbing ladders, rushing through aisles, always with a pile of books to stacks half the size of my body. Now I'd have to do an 8-hour shift with wet feet. As soon as I'd left home or been asked to leave, I'd lost any ability or knowledge of how to take care of myself. The Strand was filled with weirdos, but even they knew enough not to show up to work with wet sneakers and bell-bottoms. They'd had some kind of home training. I could just imagine what Ben would say to me. Bear, he called me Bear. There's some men you shouldn't ignore, weathermen. I might have counted there were weather women too, but it was the 90s, and we both knew this was barely true. Then he'd smile. Not all men are bad, Bear, but the baddest are my favorite. The doors to the Strand hadn't opened yet to the public, and I was surprised to see the entire staff, including management, up front by the book buying desk. Management rent, I haven't changed the names yet. Management rent Fred, Nancy, his golden-haired daughter, who always seemed angry, and Fred's underling, Charlie. Fred and Nancy were the royalty of the kingdom, a kingdom not built on gold, but a kingdom built on a shifting pile of books. It was so unusual, all of us together. We definitely never talked to or heard from the king, but there he was before us, in his raggedy threads and his bearded darkness. There was a strange nervousness and energy in the crowd I couldn't quite put my finger on. It was eerily quiet. I looked to find Ben, but I couldn't see him, so I squeezed my way towards Tom. Tom was fascinating to me. He told me he'd gone to school in Kansas and that their schools were underground because of the tornadoes. It made him well-suited for long winter days at the Strand. "What's going on?" I whispered to him. "There was a bombing at B. Dalton." When I looked surprised, he said, "Don't you listen to the news?" I was embarrassed. I like to think of myself as politically aware, but I got most of my news by reading the covers of the New York Post on the long subway rides from Gun Hill Road to the Strand. All week there had been pictures of a writer and a book, all red and on fire. Fatwa, Fat Chance, Rushdie, In a Rush to Die, and this morning, bombs away at B. Dalton. It seemed there was a novelist, and he'd written a book that had made lots of people angry, but things had snowballed so quickly it made everyone's head spin. When I saw the pictures of the writer in the Post, he just looked like an old desi uncle to me, the kind who'd come for free meals on the weekends. Fred cleared his throat, and we all turned to him, surprised, but he was simply clearing his throat as a cue for Charlie, who began. "You've probably heard about the bombing." There was a murmur. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who didn't read the news. "Are we going to close the Strand?" It was Henry from the history department with his Coke bottle glasses. Charlie gave him a withering look, and we all followed suit by doing the same. Close the Strand? Did this Strand ever close? Henry clearly didn't have what it takes to work there. He'd be weeded out. Charlie continued, "Bomb threats were not called in before the detonation, so we want you to keep your ears and eyes open for any suspicious customers." Are there any non-suspicious customers at the Strand? It was Chris from the poetry section with his manic panic pink hair. There was a wave of laughter, and I was annoyed. Chris fell into the category of guys who'd come from the suburbs to be a writer in New York City and gotten a job at the Strand for the cool factor but had an allowance from his parents. I hated these employees. I myself was a disowned, homeless, queer, lost and found. Nobody would ever hire me except for the Strand category. When I'd shared this analysis with Ben, he'd said, "Bear, that's what I love about you. You're just a little pocket-sized barrel of rage." "You know what we mean," Paul said, and I got a sinking feeling. "You know what we mean" meant Muslim. There was more laughter, and I grew hot. With my ripped jeans and braless way of wearing clothing, no one knew I was Muslim. For them, I was just another weirdo. No one knew except for Ben. I turned to see that he'd arrived at his desk, and I caught his eye. He raised his eyebrows and shook his head gently, tightening his lips. He understood. Charlie was equally annoyed, and his voice was tense. The benefit of being an independent bookstore is that we can make our own choices. We aren't tied to a chain, and we're choosing to keep selling the book. Now Nancy spoke. She'd never spoken to us before. "If there is an issue, we will assess the threat. If necessary, we will announce over the loudspeakers that the Strand must close, and it'll be up to you to evacuate customers in your section." There was a murmur through the crowd of fear and excitement. Were we revolutionary or sitting ducks? Also, Charlie added, trying to soften her tone, the satanic verses had made readers curious about Islam, so customers will also be looking for the Quran, and it's in the religion section, he said before anyone could make any more remarks. I could just imagine what my religious mother and father would say about most people being interested in Islam. Alhamdulillah. All day long, I tried to capture Ben's attention, but he was always running through the store with a stack of books that reached from his groin all the way to his chin. He walked so fast, carrying novels from the book-buying desk to his fiction desk, as if he was rescuing baby birds from rising river waters. There was a tension in the air heavy before a storm, with a backdrop of classical music like a horror movie. It was a slow day. Most customers had heard the news of bookstore bombings and decided it wasn't worth it to die for a book. The people who were there were either clueless or brave. Around lunchtime, someone got control of the sound system. Usually there was jazz or classical music, so when Rock the Casbah came on, people jumped. Adrenaline shot through the store. It was undeniable. The sleepiness of the Strand had been shaken off. We'd left timelessness and entered time. The lyrics seized through my brain. Sharif don't like it, rock the Casbah, rock the Casbah. And I remembered the video, a white man dressed as an Arab man being made into a buffoon. The stereo was behind the cashiers, and after a few moments of confusion, Charlie rushed across the aisles and turned it off. I was standing there stunned when Ben found me. "Bear, come to my office," he said, guiding me by the elbow. Ben's office was in the desk in the back, just a toppling pile of books. Now, Bear, I'm going to show you something, but I need you to stay calm. Fred didn't want to put it out in the open. Before I could say anything, he pulled it out. No, Bear, breathe. My body became hot. There were so many feelings pumping through my brain, and I started venting immediately. Ben, how could you? Everyone's getting this book because they hate Muslims. Look at what they're saying. Sharif don't like it and all that stuff. They don't care about books. They just care about hurting us. I felt a sudden clarity in my fury. The images of the author hadn't been the only images in the news. They'd been side by side with images of Iraqi children murdered, the world's oldest libraries destroyed, museums blown apart by US bombs. See, these newspapers seem to say, these Muslim people don't like books, so we must kill them, all of them. We are right to bomb them into oblivion. It was a connecting thread as invisible as a spider web, but as thick as a rope for anyone who got caught in it. Ben remained calm and just peered down at me from his reading glasses. It's a beautiful book, Bear. You should try reading it. I don't think we should sell it, I said stubbornly. Ben shook his head. Bear, I can't believe you believe in censorship. I don't, my voice petered out. Then his look was searing. Understand that I don't see any difference between Jesse Helms or the Ayatollah Khomeini. But Ben, don't you see why Muslims would be mad, what's done to us? Bear, he said. And the way he said it, he didn't need to say more. He was a gay black man living in the United States. His ancestors had survived uncounted American horrors. He'd barely lived through the AIDS epidemic while his love, his partner Tom, his best friends, his community hadn't. Of course I understand what is done to people like us. Tears came into my eyes. I'm gonna get emotional now. He still included me in the us, despite my misguided stubbornness. Embarrassed, I gave my most lamest excuse. But Ben, I just started reading Remembrance of Things Past. Oh, Bear, he said, turning away from me to price books. We both know you're never going to finish that. So, spoiler. She does read the book and love it. I'll stop there. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.